thanks everybody for joining us today on the Retail Code. I have, as usual, myself, Gary Newbury, and Liza Amlani. Lisa, do you want to give us a quick high level?
Absolutely. The type of work that I do is really around being a trusted advisor for with an industry insider perspective. So I work with retail tech companies, almost like an interpreter, giving them a better understanding of the lay of the land from retail end to end, whether it's merchandising or product creation, giving them insight into what retailers actually need from their tech solutions. And then I also help retailers and brands across channel, especially if they are physically native and new to digital, looking at their merchandise assortment, making sure that they're not really taking advantage too much of that endless aisle online. And then of course I do some teaching and guest speaking.
Excellent. We're going to dig back into that in a minute, but I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Gary Newbury. I'm a senior exec on call, focused on the supply chain, and particularly the retail supply chain, bringing about agility, innovation, and digitization of the supply chain to try to get us all to a much better place. Today, I want to talk about, let me put it a different way. In your last Merchant Life newsletter, which is an incredible read, and I recommend everybody has it.
Thank you.
I'll send a bill later.
Love it.
It was all about, okay, so a retailer will plan out its season. It will put together its assortment plan, or margin markups and all that kind of stuff. It will place orders, bring it into the network, send it to stores. Then it knows perhaps it's going to do a markdown program, and at the end of that, coming to the end of where we think that the season finishes for that particular item or that class. We run a clearance program, and then we end up with stock on our hands. And then your note really gave some great ideas of different options that a retailer can avail themselves of. Now, I want to actually scratch a surface on this, not of that end of the process, but how do we stop bringing stock in that's not going to sell, or if we have to sell it on clearance? Why would we create a situation that is very expensive to bring product, especially if it's coming from the Far East, into our network, spend time and energy putting it into stores, holding it in stores, making people walk past it and not buy it, and end up effectively giving it away? So I think we want to do today, and tapping into some of your merchant experience, how can we actually minimize that stock?
I think it really starts with planning. So like you mentioned, the line plan. So that's really the blueprint of the season, let's call it. And it's where you build the foundation of your assortment. The way that many traditional retailers are planning with their planning teams and their buyers is that they're planning at a minimum a year in advance. When you're planning so far ahead, you don't actually know what's going to happen. Look at COVID. That's a great example with store closures. You don't know how many units are going to sell, what categories are going to sell, and how many units are going to sell at what colors, and really at what price point. So in some cases, it has been almost like a guessing game. You're using historical data, sell-throughs, that sort of thing, and of course what's on trend to delight the customers, right? But when you're looking at things a year in advance, it's very difficult to understand what the customer behavior is going to be, the socioeconomic landscape is going to look like, and of course what the customer is really going to want at that time. And that's where I really push that retailers start bringing on a lot more technology to help them make better decisions, whether it's demand planning or getting closer to market. So not buying a year in advance.
Well, let me just step back into that. Let's bring in more technology. So let's assume that we've been doing the same process, typically with the same people, often for a long time. It's a decade, maybe two. So what we're doing when we bring in technology is to automate that process. So
in some cases, not all.
Well, this is what I want to kind of explore. If we were just to automate that process, we'd have all the inherent risks documented and embedded into our system to be able to carry on this this jolly trip of bringing in stock and ending up having to do markdowns and clearance and some of those options that you described in your number 11 merchandise.
Yes, yes. I think what's typical is that markdowns are actually planned into your line plan. I think that's what you're getting at.
Well,
which
yes.
Yes. Okay. So
as well
because,
as what Lisa, before you go on,
sorry.
And also, sorry,
It's okay.
And also, what other areas would technology bridge, which humans aren't currently bridging?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's, how do we break out of this, and how do we use technology to advance our cause rather than just embed our current situation?
Yeah. And you know what, we can look at this so many ways, but I think when we look at it as the foundation of buying is that line plan, and the fact that we're planning so far in advance and that we're not using real-time data to understand consumer behaviors and what they actually want in real time, that is a huge challenge, because when you're working with suppliers and factories, they have minimum order quantities. So a lot of what you're doing is you're using these minimum order quantities to place orders of, like, let's say 500 units because that's your minimum, and you know that you're only going to sell 200 because that's what you sold last year. Then what are you doing with the rest of that 300? You're planning that into your markdown schedule. You're planning that into your promotion calendar so that it matches up to promotional events like a Black Friday or a Boxing Day or a Mother's Day event. That's the challenge, is that the way that planners are planning today is so far in advance, and they're limited by these minimum order quantities, and leadership teams giving them revenue plans and forecasts that, say, okay, you need to increase your revenue and profits by 10%. Then you're going to increase your orders by 10% because that's going to give you that 10% of extra revenue. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard a lot of stories around markdowns and how people are planning for markdowns, which is not the right way to plan.
Yeah, I wonder if before we perhaps branch into the supply chain options, you talk about these minimum order quantities, and bearing in mind that what you'll probably talk about is the Far East.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're tied into literally the full container, just around the full container's worth of, and the number for that is 500, or if there's some other factor in the production cycle, the setup, or actually saying, if I give you an order of 500, I just bring you into this part of our planning process rather than let you flounder towards the end. So my question is about, I wonder how flexible those minimum order quantities could be made with perhaps a different approach.
I think that one thing to add before I even get into that is those minimum order quantities are really based on the discounts that you're going to get. So if you order less, you get less of a discount and you're paying more for that product, and that eats into your bottom line. So it really all comes down to, everything is about profitability, right? We overbuy, we make too much goes into landfills. And now, because customers are so much more educated and they see a lot more of how the industry, especially fashion, is impacting the climate and the globe, what you're going to see is that suppliers are going to start catching on, because retailers are saying, you know what, I want to be more sustainable, I need to make less. So suppliers, you get on board, we do this together. Markdowns really hurt everyone. So let's just, find a way around that. And I believe that most suppliers are on board. They are a lot more transparent with not only their practices, but how that impacts the number of units they're saying are the minimum order quantities. I find that a lot of retailers are looking at other options, like buying local, which you and I have talked about before. So I think that there is an opportunity here, but it really starts with that framework. And if we don't plan better and closer to the customer, to what they actually want to buy, we're really going to be stuck in this cycle that we have been in for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years. I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very kind of established formula.
Yeah.
It's probably at least from the 70s, 80s, if not way before that. People in the merchant sphere are able to, let's say, currency is the accumulated margin, initial markup, and all these kind of terms are very deeply embedded in that part of retailing.
Yeah, I will give one example where I wasn't a department store buyer. I was a branded buyer with Ralph Lauren. And because we had to buy into programs because they were global and we were representing a brand across many, many department stores, you had to have a minimum order quantity by region. So if within region, if Germany didn't buy enough, then I had to carry that so that we could all buy that style. Yeah. So, I mean, again, it comes down to that line plan. It comes down to how are we planning so far ahead? And of course, why aren't we working with our suppliers in a better way?
I've said for some time that retailers have to, especially the larger ones, where they exert considerable power on suppliers, either it's highway or the highway, and here's a cost model you have to fit in if you're going to get onto my shelf. And by the way, you're going to have to help me pay for the shelves as well as fees. Yeah. Very complicated. I've said for some time that unless retailers start to look at that dynamic in a different way, with all the things that are now available in terms of CPGs, particularly going direct, looking to go direct, there's the micro fulfillment centre, there's cheap property prices, might open the CPG like us, and they might collaborate with other CPGs.
Yes.
So that in adjacent areas, they may actually say, look, let's collaborate on this and put a store up, the Kraft, Nestle, Conagra store, where we have a range of products that we can all work to compete, not on against, but compete to win the customer from that channel called retail, where really it's hard work. Yeah. We know the scheme. We go in there with our expectation of achieving a rate. They knock us down, then they change the spec halfway through, and it costs us even more money.
Yeah.
So retailers have to find different ways, and this pandemic is possibly a way of getting under the skin on this and actually reflecting on the past and saying what's good of that we can take forward, and what's good of this, things like collaboration, joint planning, that we can actually take forward and make retail the channel that suppliers want to use. But there has to be some flexibility both ways. It can't be the supplier says, to the points that you're making, this is a minimum order quantity, take it or leave. It's just a reverse of big retailers, big suppliers telling you how a business is going to want, because it's in everybody's interest. If we can get a customer in, buy the stuff, everybody wins.
Yeah. And I think, you actually made me remember a great story, which was when I was working with Caban, which was part of Club Monaco, part of Ralph Lauren. Ralph Lauren Home did not work with Club Monaco Caban Home to piggyback on orders to save on transportation costs, any sort of TRC decisions that had to be made, or even minimum order quantities for the hard goods, which is where a lot of the cost comes from. But with Club Monaco, I was able to piggyback on their orders when they were buying basic t-shirts so that I could bring in 50 units instead of 500 and still get that 80% margin that the Club Monaco was making. You don't see that a lot, especially in hard goods, I find. But a great story from this week is when Valentino's factory actually burned down, and Prada said that actually you can use our space to make the shoes. And that's really nice to see, where they're not both part of the same umbrella company, like a Kering Group or Richemont or whatever. I just love that, Prada kind of came in and stepped in and said, what, we can help you. I wish that we could see that across all of retail. If sourcing suppliers are not getting on board to lower those minimum.
The fact that your order quantity for maybe a season is lower than the minimum order quantity gives you two choices. Either you find a way of negotiating with the supplier to bring it down somehow, and it may be, using other avenues you've got access to, either to just collaborate with other suppliers or within the group that you may belong to. But then that if you can't get that, there's not much you can do in the supply chain, because if you say, well, do you know what, just to get it right, we're going to have 6 months, and in 6 months, because we get a closer picture on the market. But you're faced with 2 sets of minimum order quantities, so that doesn't take us very far. But on the situation where you have confidence you can sell way above the minimum order quantity, then it's all about what can the supply chain help us do, instead of buying a big bulk and whacking it into the warehouse and feeding it out to the stores. Maybe we have 2 or 3 attempts of doing this, so we reduce our exposure to the stock, but also have the opportunity to fine-tune the style, the color, whatever it might be, or size range, if it's in fashion.
And I think that's where technology could really come in and, almost save the day with demand planning tools that if you can get closer to market, you get closer to the customer, you use demand planning to understand data and make those data-driven decisions that can work with supply chain folks, like in a DC, for example, and understand how much workforce you'd need to bring those units through at certain amounts of periods of time within that seasonal calendar. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there, but we just need to get more retailers on board to use the technology and to accept that closer to market is better.
Yeah, just test that one, closer to market. I wonder, I just thought I'd scratch the surface, what just for the audience, what you mean by that? Do you mean making it closer to the market, or just being actually closer? Because we all talk about being customer centric. Of course, we all are.
Yeah.
Well, self-evident, isn't it? No, it is not. Because most people, to the point you made, I think in the last episode, where go and shop your brand, go on the shop floor, go and place an order on the web, bump into customers. Well, not literally, but kind of nosy up to them and ask them what's going on, what brought them to the store. So being close to the customer is absolutely essential for retailers as we walk through this, because so much has changed. And we can't rely on the data for the last 10 years to give us any indication as to what's going on now and what they need now. So when you say close to the market, maybe you can just
sure. So what I mean by close to market is, let's go back to that line plan again. Line plan takes into consideration the seasonal calendar. Most retailers are planning a year in advance. So when that year starts, that's when they put the concept together. They develop a line plan, understand how many categories they're going to buy into, what the depth is, how many colors. They work with designers. By the time they go through the calendar and they get to market, it's a year. If we can shorten that calendar to, let's say, 3-4 months, that means you're going to get closer to the time of the goods being on the shop floor, where you can predict a little bit better what the customer is going to want. That's where real time comes into play. It's not really real time, because you obviously can't produce in one day, but I mean, 12 months compared to 4 months, that's a big deal. If look at COVID, right? As stores closed in March, there was a lot of chit chat that something was coming. If there was a way that when March hit, when stores were closing, if there was a way to not start working on your next season, and your next season was only 4 months away, you could have saved so much money, time, effort, production, waste. So getting closer to market and faster to market is, honestly, it is the key to line planning in a better way.
Excellent.
Hope that makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to all our audience who are listening for probably every word and hoping to take something back and rethink. We have to rethink, and I'm sure, as we said before we actually got recording, is that I think probably retailers have every intention. They set off a season. Okay, we've got to solve this problem. We've got to find a different way, and they set off with this great intention. And then the clock runs forward, and they get to that critical point where they have to place an order, or so won't get any stock at all. So, and then all that work that may have been all that good intention of solving this problem and reducing the amount of overstocks that we have to deal with through markdown and different options that you spelled out. I suspect that there's okay appetite, but when it comes to the crunch point, the appetite's lost, and we do what we've always done.
Yes.
I'm hoping the pandemic has shaken that shell and has made retailers reflect and just go, do you know what, we've been doing this for say 100 years, not personally, but that we now need a process, a system, call it however they might describe it, a methodology of solving this, or at least radically reducing it down to something that we can be comfortable about. We can, sure, we might want to put some provision for markdown in, but it's like tiny compared to what it used to be, because we have more confidence. We understand our consumers better. Therefore, we can price point it correctly, and we understand our consumers better. Therefore, we know what stock they want and what volumes of that stock they're prepared to absorb from us.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that if we really think about the number of SKUs we're developing, the number of items we're really setting up every season, do we really need all that? No. We need to reduce the number of SKUs we're putting in the marketplace. We need to reduce the depth to, kind of hone in that over purchasing and overbuying and overproduction. We also need to really understand, do we need that big line plan for the entire year? We don't need a calendar for the whole year. Approvals, changing the way people are working, getting more digital, that's going to reduce that calendar and get you closer to market, getting you closer to market faster. So it's really changing the way that you've been working. But you're right, you just have to kind of pause and just almost like just start fresh.
I think on that bombshell, starting fresh, I think it's a wrap. So I think we've had a really good conversation about trying to get into the nuts and bolts of reducing the transportation, the movement from the supplier to our stores, and which can often result in quite a big markdown and cost as a result of that. I think we'll pick up the pace on our next podcast. So in the meantime, thanks, Liza, and thank you to all our audience for listening in and continuing to support the conversations that we have with each other.
My pleasure.
Okay. It's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Hit the like button and leave your comments. Connect with us on LinkedIn to get the heads up on future episodes of The Retail Code.